Good morning. Welcome to Ramblings with Joe. That's good coffee. Um, Welcome to Ramblings with Joe. That was my first sip. So, I usually avoid talking about religion simply for the fact that there are so many different religions, so many different. It's a porcupine of a subject, and it's very personal to everybody. But I thought I'd give it a shot today. See where this particular road will take us. I have some very, I'm not sure the word strong is the right word, but I have some very, it's not flexible either. I don't know. That's why I'm a member of the Church of I Don't Know. So I've talked in the past about my awakening to spirituality, and yesterday I was listening to a podcast. It had Tucker Carlson. It was his podcast with Bishop Robert Barron, and I haven't finished the podcast. I'll say that outright. I'm not at that point yet where I can say I finished that podcast. It's a few hours long, or 2 hours long, and I have not got to the end of it. But Tucker is not a Catholic. Obviously, Bishop Barron, well, I guess not obviously, there's bishops in other faiths, but Bishop Barron is a Catholic, and I think he was invited on the show to talk about the new Pope, and the Pope being a American. That's kind of new to both Catholicism and America. And it was a kind of reawakening listening to these guys talk. Tucker was asking all of the usual questions that Protestants ask Catholics, and the bishop was he was being as direct as he could without being confrontational. So, and that reminded me of growing up in a small town in Georgia, and growing up Catholic. I felt ostracized. There were a few things that led me to that point. Number one, in the 6th grade, I moved from Bangor, Maine to this small town in Georgia. And it was a culture shock, to say the least. The ability to immerse myself in the new culture of the South was more than challenging. It was daunting. And as a 6th grader, as a 12 or 13 year old, it was daunting, to say the least. Number one, coming from Bangor, Maine, I had an accent. And the accent was definitely that of someone from Maine. Ironically, in Maine, I had a bit of an accent as well, because, well, I was an Army brat, so I kind of didn't have an accent, but I picked up the Maine accent fairly quickly, and that's kind of the accent I had. Obviously, I've lost it now. I lean much more toward the Southern accent, Georgia, than I do the Maine or any other accent. But growing up in Georgia as a Catholic it was a strange experience. I felt ostracized. That ranged from being my own fault, because I'm sure that a lot of this was just a little bit of paranoia, being in a strange place and then not participating in the majority of the individuals in the South Church. But I definitely felt ostracized. There were also some outright accusations thrown my way, especially as I advanced into high school, and I hated school. I couldn't stand school. It was so slow. It was so boring. It was one of the, not just in the South. I didn't like school in the North either. It was completely just mind-numbing how they taught children, how they taught me as a child. Other children may have glamored onto it without issue and thrived in it. I did not. I found it too slow, too just boring. It was not challenging at all. Anyway, as a Catholic in the South, I'm rambling a bit this morning. You're at the right podcast. So the self-separation was something that I only have myself to blame for. But I was set aside by teachers and students when I came to Georgia. And eventually in high school, it came to be something that I realized was more of a religious thing than a regional thing. By the time I was in high school, I had completely lost my northern accent, that maniac accent that is so strong. And I had leaned hard into the southern accent. And I'm sure you still hear me with that southern drawl occasionally. Heavy drawl. But the ability to let go of my beliefs at that point and kind of immerse myself in that culture was still out of reach. At one point, I considered becoming a Catholic priest. I was very strong in my Catholic faith. I still have a tendency to lean toward that faith without even knowing it. Eventually, I became a atheist and then returned back to the spiritual side of life. But I was accused of worshiping idols while I was in high school. I was told I was going to go to hell unless I changed my faith and accepted Christ. I was told that just so many of the typical things that you hear, and many of it I don't think that the kids that were saying this to me believed. I think that, children, especially around that age, they can be very mean and very angry. I don't hold any grudge against any of these kids, now adults, now senior citizens. It was just, just how kids are. They can be very aggressive. But this was kind of the atmosphere I grew up in. And I was always kind of set aside from other kids anyway, because I didn't mesh well in school. I found one really good friend. Ironically, his father was a Methodist preacher, and I spent a lot of time at his house. He embraced me. The preacher, he explained his point of view and his religious beliefs, and I think that may have been the first time that I heard the sentiment that we're all bound for the same place. Excuse me. That we're all bound for the same place. We're just taking different roads. And that gave me the freedom from that point on to have an understanding that perhaps there is a road to heaven that is more circuitous or more direct, that there are different roads to the same destination. That was probably the first time I felt at ease with my religion in the presence of someone else who was of a different faith. and he was a Methodist preacher. So that was kind of where I came from, kind of the roots of my spiritual knowledge. When I went into the Navy, I explored a lot of different religions. Went to a lot of different churches. I've been baptized a number of times, as well as in the Catholic Church. The ability to give someone the emotional feeling of acceptance and embracing someone emotionally into a community is universal across all the churches that I went to. And the technique was always the same. And I recognized the technique fairly quickly. The technique basically being embrace the person, welcome the person, intimidate the person, make the person feel on edge, bring the person to the front of the congregation, and have them do some sort of acceptance or some sort of ritual within the church that has meaning that they are now part of the fold of that church. And without exception, this happened at every church. And the formula, it's very effective. It's very effective. I don't want you to get me wrong. I had that same situation at the Catholic Church. I did the same thing at a youth rally that we went to, and this is just universal across all churches. If you can instill that feeling initially within somebody, you got a pretty good chance of capturing them into your church. And I think this is done. I think it's done by the laymen of the church as a way to bring people in. I think it's done on purpose by the leaders of the church. And I've yet to meet anybody who would either, number one, admit it, or number two, defend it. So, I don't know. I don't know if any of that's true or all of that's true. I know that was my impression. That's how I saw things. So, in recent months rather, my wife has decided to study Judaism and the Jewish practices, and she has embraced that philosophy, spirituality. She's learning Hebrew. She's an incredible woman. She's incredibly intelligent, and she is going down that road, and I encourage her to do so. I think that if that's her path, if that's her line to be embraced by however you look at things, gain entry to heaven, be embraced by God, then she should. But during her studies, it came to me. There's some compatibility there between Christians and Jewish people. And I'm a gamer, not so much lately, but I used to be a gamer, video gamer, and went from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One. Now, the Xbox One would take the Xbox 360 discs, and they call that backward compatibility. The 360 could not take the Xbox One discs. This is sort of how Judaism to Christianity works. I noticed that a lot of the prayers that she was saying and sharing with me, they weren't offensive to Christianity. They were perfectly fine for a Christian to say. They did not have Christ in them, obviously, but they were sent up as prayers to God. And that's kind of like the video game thing. That's backwards compatibility. If you are a Christian, with very few exceptions, if you are a Christian and you are invited to pray with a Jewish person, you should pray with that Jewish person. I think that the excuse me. I think that the ability to find some commonality, some way to commune with each other, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Buddhist or even Islamic, if you can find a way to find a commonality, then you're moving in the right direction for the world. And that's important. So I think if you're Christian, maybe even if you're not invited, maybe if you're with a Jewish person, maybe you should have a Jewish prayer. I need a cough button. The cats are almost over their cold, so evidently I'm getting one. Speaking from a Christian point of view, praying to the Lord God, there's nothing wrong with that. We have the Lord's Prayer. You should obviously be considerate of a Jewish person's faith and not bring Christ into the prayer if you're praying with a Jewish person. But I see plenty of compatibility there. Also, while I was growing up and while I was doing my world travels and even my national travels here in America, I ran into quite a few people who did not like Jewish people because they weren't Christian, because they weren't embracing Christ. And I've never looked at Jewish people like that, mostly because of my Catholic upbringing. During the Stations of the Cross, during the Stations of the Cross, when the Catholics did that, we recognized that the Jewish people, within that ceremony, within that part of history, Jewish people represent us. We are the Jewish people. We are, speaking as a former Catholic, we are the people that Christ came to die for. So, the Jewish people, if you dislike the Jewish people, if you have hate in your heart for the Jewish people, you're hating your own history, because the Jewish history, if you're a Christian, is your adopted history. If you're not directly, if your lineage doesn't go all the way back to Israel, but that's your adopted history. That's you have decided, I am Christian, and Christ was a Jew, so you have adopted that history. That's you. That's your past. And the way I look at Jewish people today is that's kind of a living history. They haven't accepted Christ. Therefore, they are still living that part of history that you adopted. So, as a Christian, there should be some appreciation for Jewish people. There are coming up on the end here, folks. There are some faiths that I could never follow, that I have looked into. If you are following a faith that teaches brimstone and fire, that teaches that leans hard onto the you're going to hell part of your faith. That if you don't do this, then this is the repercussion. I'm not really interested in that faith. I prefer a faith of love. I prefer a faith of enlightenment over a faith of hate. I think that a faith of hate that teaches and leans into the fire and brimstone side of things, I think that that's kind of a juvenile faith. It's a faith of kids. Don't do that or you'll be punished. And although that may be true and worthy of mentioning, I think that line of faith, if that is what your faith is based upon, then it's not a faith that I'm interested in, and I would never encourage anybody to participate in. I'm learning a lot about Judaism at the moment because of my wife, but the ability to explain to somebody that what you really want is a faith of love is very important. I'm not doing things out of fear. I'm not afraid of my fellow man. I understand there are some people that need to be feared, and you need to protect yourself and your family from them, but I'm not in general afraid of my fellow man. I'm doing things out of love, and that's what we should all be doing things out of. And if your faith is teaching that you do things out of love, I can get behind that faith. If your faith is teaching you how to do things because of hate, because other people are wrong, therefore you must change them. You must force them into your faith. Well, that's not for me. I don't think that's for anybody. But you do you. I think that it's important that we lean harder into the faiths of love than we lean into the faiths of hate. So if you're in a faith and you're sitting and you're listening to your preacher or your rabbi or your I don't know what they call the Muslim leader, I forgot, or a Buddhist monk, and you're constantly hearing about the hell and damnation and how bad things are if you don't do this, where you're going if you don't obey. You got to ask yourself, is that where you want to be? Do you want to be treated like a child instead of bought? Instead of sprung forward and doing things out of love? That's where I'm at in my faith. That's what I base all my actions and all my prayers. They're not based on hate. They're not based on fear. They're not based on anything other than love. I'm not a new age anything. I don't go with this God is love. I think that if we're going to be theists, that we have to teach love and not fear and hate. But I'm just a truck driver. What do I know? So I wanted to get that out today. I wanted to say my little piece there. Doesn't mean anything. I'm just trying to get through this life like the rest of everybody. It's just one point of view, my point of view. Kind of a short history and how I landed in the church if I don't know. Ignorance should be embraced and then wrestled to the ground and pounded out of sight so that you learn constantly And when you get to the point where there is no more ignorance, well, that's when you become enlightened as to how little you know and how much more ignorance you have. And I have a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of things I don't know. Still learning, still growing. Hopefully that doesn't ever stop. I hope that you get to keep learning and growing as well. I think I'm good with that. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I hope you find peace, love, and dream. Ciao.